Hello and welcome to Alignment, using your values to invest in social change, brought to you by Oikocredit US. We're proud to bring you this first in the series of interviews with experts in the field of values-based investing. I'm Matt Eldridge, CEO of Oikocredit US.
And I'm Sara, Shoff, Chief Operating Officer of Oikocredit US. So our first special guest in the Alignment series is impact investor and author Janine Firpo. But before we introduce Janine, let me say just a quick word about our organization. Oikocredit US is the nonprofit US affiliate of Oikocredit International, a 45-year-old global cooperative that works to improve living conditions in low-income countries. Oikocredit does this by investing in microfinance, small and medium enterprises in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And our job here at Oikocredit US is to raise awareness and financial support in North America for these efforts.
As Sara mentioned, we are delighted to speak today with Janine Firpo. Janine is a values-aligned investor who wrote the book, Activate Your Money. It's designed to help women in particular find the confidence they need to take control of their money and use it to change the world. And let me tell you, there's something in this book for everyone.
So we'll pepper, thanks Janine. We'll pepper Janine with many questions, and then we'll open up the floor for questions from the audience. So ask your question in the chat at any time, and we'll bring them up during the Q&A. If you'd like to read it yourself, Amber will ask you that. Otherwise, Amber can read it out for you. So as you're thinking of questions from our questions, please include them in the chat.
Thanks, Sara. Next, a little bit about Janine. Janine has a long history of working at the intersection of women and their money, from Apple Computer to the World Bank to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She's always found herself making an impact. In 2017, she left a successful 35-year career in tech and international development to focus on how women can create a more just and equitable society through their financial investments. Janine, hello. It's a pleasure to speak with you today.
Hi, for the second time. I'm sorry I jumped the gun earlier. Thanks so much. It's really a delight to be here with you.
Thanks so much, Janine. I'm lucky because I get to work with you about once a month. You chair the investment committee for Realize Impact, a nonprofit where I'm a board member. So I'm happy to have this chance to chat in a different context, but also in the spirit of how people can use investments to make the world a better place. So let's go ahead and get started. Janine, you write in your book, and by the way, let me show this book, Activate Your Money, available in bookstores now and on Amazon.com. You write in your book that each and every day you are living your why through the choices you make about where you put your time, attention, and resources. Yet this why has been left out of most investment decisions. Do we really want to leave that out? Janine Firpo, what is your why? And why did you write this book?
Well, my why has changed over my life, but it's always been about service, and it's always been about, in some way, making the world a better place. So I did that in my career when I was working in international development. I did that when I was working in microfinance, when I was working in mobile money. But I made a really huge pivot in my life at one point and left the high-tech sector to do the kind of work I did around poverty alleviation and changing and bettering the lives of people, and realized about 10 years ago that although I'd made this huge pivot and actually was working for less money than maybe I could have, my money, my investments were in things that were actually counter to the work that I was doing and the change that I was trying to create in the world. So I set off to align all of my own money with my values. I wanted to be in full integrity. And when I retired about 3 years ago, I realized we've gotten to a point where anyone can invest their money, all of it. So I'm talking about investing from your cash, your bonds, your stock, private deal, real estate, you name it, whatever you're invested in, you can put that money to work in a more positive way. It was an uphill struggle for me, and I realized it doesn't have to be that way. And I wanted to make it easier, and particularly for women. So I wrote this book to help democratize the space and to teach anyone how they could invest their money in ways that are meaningful to them.
Thanks, Janine. In the book, you tell a really interesting story. You tell the story of being at a meeting of the Global Philanthropy Forum in 2009. And at that meeting, you stood up and announced to the audience of foundation CEOs, ultra high net worth individuals, and institutional impact investors, you announced something radical, that you wanted to align your own personal investments with your values. Would it be fair to describe their reaction as crickets, or would that be an insult to crickets?
Yeah, there was a pretty resounding quiet after I said that. And what was interesting about it, I mean, all these people were really passionate and they were taking risks with their money. But at that time, impact investing, as it was called, or socially responsible investing, was really something that ultra high net wealth individuals did, foundations, and institutional investors, because they had very deep pockets and they could take some of the risk that was associated with trying something that hadn't really been tried before. There wasn't a lot of proof at that point that you could invest your money with your values and achieve a reasonable financial return. So I was not any of those things. I worked for institutional investors. Was running a nonprofit, but I was not extremely wealthy. And I realized, why couldn't someone like me do this too? And shouldn't someone like me be able to do this too? Because as long as this required you to be ultra wealthy, then we weren't really going to achieve the goal that we needed to achieve. There's massive amounts of money in the hands of just the average person. So how could the average person do this too? So yes, it was, for the most part, no one had anything to say. And I sort of skulked away and then went off, committed to, I'm going to figure this out. And so over the next 10 years, I had a series of 3 different financial advisors who were supposed to help me get my money there. And they did to varying degrees, but I've been committed to doing this for over a decade now as a result of that meeting.
So when you went to those advisors to help you along this path, and something that we sort of know from personal experience, but is also well documented, our society here in the US, certainly throughout the world, has told women that financial decisions should be left to others, even though we know that women also actually make better financial decisions. So when you went to these financial advisors, which are often men anyways, within that industry, and like you said, they tried to help, but didn't, right? Some said they couldn't, others tried, but there were things in your portfolio that you still didn't agree with. So you really had to figure it out on your own. As you've empowered other women to align their investments with their values in the way that you have and kind of done it on your own, what have you heard back from them? What have you heard back from other women about going down this path and taking control of their investments?
So one of the things is women love this. I mean, when I talk to a woman, so research has actually been done by Morgan Stanley that shows that 84% of women and 95% of millennials want to invest their money in ways that are meaningful to them. So when I have conversations with women, they immediately get this and they're right there. They want to know more. They want to know how to do this. The other thing that's super interesting about women, when you ask them about their money and what they really would like, they want to do this in community. So we have been told all along that we're supposed to invest our money alone, or we invest with a financial advisor. It's something that we have to learn. It's super scary to a lot of women because they haven't really been taught how to do this. It feels like they could make a terrible mistake and lose all their money. So when you start to talk to them and help educate them, and they begin to get some agency around their money and they begin to feel confident about their money, they get excited. And what we're finding is, and when we give them the options to start moving that money into things that are more meaningful to them, they do. So I'm starting to see a shift, which is great. So I've worked with an organization called Invest for Better that actually helps women set up and run their own investment clubs to move their money in this way. And they've reached about 600 women. So now the time is to take what I've done with my book, combine it with what they've done, and really figure out a way to achieve much more scale. Because there are a lot of women that are anxious to do this. And we're there to help them.
So to take a step back and, like you said, you going off on your own, these other clubs that are really showing women how to do this. Part of the problem is that there hasn't been a way to do it, and the investment advisors, at least before, maybe would have said, you can't have social impact and financial return. You have to pick, or you have to have some sort of concessionary return. What do you say to people who might still be saying that about impacting for social impact and return?
So what I tend to believe is that conversation about your inability to achieve similar return is usually targeted to one or two asset classes. So the first asset class that it's targeted to in a significant way is the public stock market, is that you have to invest in the public stock market in a way to maximize return, and you have to invest there in funds that are going to give you the biggest return, right? That's one place. The other place where it is considered is in private investing, when you're either making a debt investment or you're making an equity investment in a private company. They're not even talking about any of the other asset classes. They're not considering your cash, where you can just move your savings and checking account into a local bank and get exactly the same kind of return and the same kind of safety, and have your money doing things that are much more meaningful. They're not talking about the bond market. They're not talking about a whole lot of other alternatives. So that conversation, for one thing, is very narrow in its focus. Second thing is, it's wrong. So there has been more than 20 years of study that have gone on that show that when you invest in the stock market, for example, in funds that are values aligned, there is no loss. In fact, you can get better returns in many cases. So as an example, there was a study in 219 that was conducted by a financial advisory firm run by a woman called Cornerstone Capital. They looked at over 2,200 different studies that had been conducted since the 1970s, and they found that in all of those studies showed basically the same thing, that you are not giving up return when you invest this way. And there are a range of other studies as well, more recent, some that go back farther, showing the same thing. We talk about them in the book, and because you can only put so much in the book and things are changing all the time, there's a companion website called activateyourmoney.net that has additional resources, information. There's a whole bunch of information on that site about all of the research that says you do not have to give up financial return. And the same thing is true in the private investment space.
Janine, you write in your book about the importance of where investors can start, or where people can start, and that the important first step is sorting out what one cares about. You say that people need to identify their beliefs around money that may be sabotaging them, and select the values that they'd like to integrate into their future investments. Is that complicated? Do readers need a degree in business? Is there a matrix or abacus involved?
So no. So the book starts out really talking about some basics, like what is this kind of investing and why should people care, particularly women? And just one thing I want to say about that is, by 2030, McKinsey and Company says, a study says, that women will control the majority of money in this country. The majority. So if women made the decision to start to move their money into things that really mattered to us, like our local communities, supporting female CEOs, supporting diversity, supporting a livable planet for our children and grandchildren, we could literally change the economy. So it starts off with talking about that, and then it goes into the fact that one of the things that we don't often think about is the stories that we have told ourselves and that we have been told about money from our infancy. And those stories can really impact us for both positive or negative, in a positive or negative way. And so we actually point women toward a quiz that they can take that shows them what kinds of archetypes or what kind of story they're following, and it can give them pointers about how to strengthen the pieces of that story that are helping them, and to pay attention to the pieces of that story that are hurting them. So we're actually pointing them to tools that they can use in a fun way to figure this out. In terms of values, when you think about investing your values, the question is, well, what are my values? And one of the things that are becoming sort of de facto standards in the impact space are something called the Sustainable Development Goals. And these are 17 goals for a better world that were established by the United Nations in 2015. And they're things like no hunger, sustainable cities, gender diversity, clean water, etc. And so what I did myself, and what I recommend to other women who read the book, or men who read the book, because I know you read it, Matt, is to pick between 1 to 5 of those goals and say, these are the goals that are most important to me, and I'm going to look to see if I can invest my money along with these goals. By making your universe a little bit smaller and a little bit clearer in terms of what you want your money to support, it helps you make those investment decisions a little bit easier too.
So recently, speaking of women using their money to align with their values of any sort, so Mackenzie Scott, formerly married to Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, made headlines with just how much money she gave away, $4.1 billion to nearly 400 nonprofits. Meanwhile, Jeff has shown little interest in philanthropy, at least not in the same way, and is investing his own money elsewhere. Mackenzie has actually been aligning her investments as well with her values, investing in things like One Acre Fund, Green America, the Nature Conservancy's Blue Bonds. And so it can be easy for women to say, okay, Mackenzie Scott has, a gazillion dollars, or probably will have close to an actual gazillion dollars soon. So she can afford to reallocate these things, and she can be really generous, and she can even forego some of those financial returns. So what do you tell women who aren't high net worth individuals, who are just looking to invest the money they do have and align it with their values?
So Mackenzie is a great example of what we were just talking about in terms of story. And what I'm coming to realize is that we have our own personal stories about money, but we also have our stories as a society and as a collective. And so if you think about philanthropy and you think about people of extraordinary wealth, like Mackenzie, the traditional story is when you do philanthropy, you start a foundation. You set it up, you hire a bunch of people, and then you make decisions about how that money is directed, and you give it to organizations that you think are going to achieve the goals that you want to achieve. And oftentimes you will ask them to contort themselves to a certain degree to do the things you want them to do, as opposed to the things they think they need to do. I worked for one of those foundations. When I worked there, they had a $40 billion corpus. They were giving away $4 billion a year, which was great because it was twice what they had to. By law, they were supposed to give away 5. They were giving away 10. Traditionally, a big foundation will be set up so that the growth of the principal is outpacing the amount that they're giving away. So those foundations live into perpetuity, right? That's the story we tell ourselves about what we're supposed to do. The Gates Foundation has 1,500 employees. Along comes Mackenzie Scott. In 1 year, she gave away more than the Gates Foundation did with no staff. She had a team of consultants. She gave away that money with no strings attached. She's not expecting the foundations to do her bidding. The organizations she gave the money to, she basically said to them, we think you're doing great. We're going to give you this money. It's for general operations. You can do whatever you want with it, and I don't need to see a report. She has completely changed the story about what philanthropy is. This is huger than I think a lot of people realize. So what I'm suggesting is the story that we tell ourselves about our money, which is that our money either has to be invested to maximize return regardless of the impact it's having in the world, and I guarantee you it's having an impact. The question is whether that impact is something that's aligned with your values or whether that's something that you are marching in the streets against. Your money is doing something. You should know what it's doing, and you should care about what it's doing. So we don't have to buy into the story that you have to maximize your return regardless of the externalities of that, and then give a small percentage of your total asset base away as philanthropy. We actually have the opportunity to do both. We can invest our values and get the same financial return, and anyone can do that. So the book that I wrote is not for rich people. It's really not. I mean, they can use it too, but the McKinseys of the world have a lot of people advising them and helping them. The people who don't have folks out there advising them and helping them think about this is most of us, or even those of us who are single-digit millionaires, or some of us who are female double-digit millionaires or more. We don't have people who are advising us to invest the way we want, and so we can. You can invest this way if all you have is a savings and checking account, because you can put that savings and checking account in a financial institution that's doing good in the world. So in my view, this is for anyone.
Thanks, Janine. And, I know, just speaking personally, I have found your book very inspiring. I know that your target market, a lot of what you've written is targeted at women. And I just want to say again, I feel like it's really been so helpful to me personally as well. So thanks. You write in the book about how your, I guess, the influence that your parents had on how you viewed money as you grew up. You grew up clipping coupons, saving pennies, wearing used clothing. You also inherited their deep-seated fear of going without. And it didn't cross your mind to think of investing in things you cared about, even well into your 50s and along a successful career path. And I have to tell you, your story gave me flashbacks to my own youth, clipping coupons from the newspaper, adding to our penny jar, endless trips to Goodwill long before it became, fashionable to pop tags and go thrifting. How did you change your perspective? How did you reimagine your relationship with money?
So it was a process. I started out, and I can say that my mom was wonderful in that my mom taught me about money. My mom was really transparent about money. She got involved in the real estate market when I was in junior high school and taught me how to buy and sell real estate. She started investing in the stock market in the 80s and taught me how to do that. So my early forays into investing were pretty traditional. I bought real estate in the California Bay Area, and I invested in companies in the stock market. But then as I learned and I started making my own life choices, I started looking at my investments differently. So I became aware of what we now call climate change in 1991, which is a whole nother story. But, so I was aware of this stuff. I was aware of the impact of what we do in the world through the work that I was doing. And at some point, particularly with oil and gas, I started looking at that and I was thinking, why am I invested in these oil and gas companies? This is just wrong. And I would talk to my mom and she would say, because they're giving us a good return, we're staying. And at some point, I just decided, no, I'm not going to do that. I have a choice here. I don't have to be invested in the things that I think are harming the planet or that are harming people. I can actually make a choice to put my money to work in things that are better. And so part of the way I do things is I experiment. So I had a fund in the stock market that was a very traditional Vanguard sort of total stock market fund. And I owned that. And then I bought something that I thought was much more values aligned. And then I watched them and I watched their return. And what I started to see was, wow, this thing that I feel way better about, it's doing as good as this other one. Why am I in this other stuff? And so I just started accelerating that shift. And the more I did it, the more I saw that I could do this. And then I got to tell you, just the feeling of it, just knowing what my money is doing, it feels great. It's such a powerful thing to know that your money is just not this thing that's out there that's alien to you, but it's actually something that you can really leverage to create the things you want to see. It's a great feeling. So I just keep doing it. I do more and more.
Janine, you outline in your book several archetypes to help women think about their money behaviors. And some of those include the saver who's retired and saved consistently to fund their retirement, or the caretaker, a divorced mom of two trying to rebuild her career. And I must admit, I was a little disappointed that you didn't have an archetype for my 87-year-old mother-in-law. She immigrated to the US after World War II. She literally dries and reuses paper towels, washes and reuses Ziploc bags, and eats leftovers if they only have a light layer of mold. It just needs a little toasting, is what she'll tell us. Why didn't you have a category for war survivor and radical conservationist?
Well, there kind of is one for her. And my mom was one of those, because my mom, she would write letters for years because she didn't want to pay a long distance phone charge, even when you paid one fee. She didn't quite get that. It's like, you pay one fee, you can call anywhere in the country, it's okay. She's still writing letters. But there is an archetype called the guardian, and I'm that too, because that guardian archetype is actually one in which you are guarding your money. You are afraid of losing it. You are fearful that something terrible is going to happen. The other shoe is going to drop and you're going to be left bereft, right? So like a lot of women of my generation who were told we could do anything, but that we also didn't really have role models of women who managed their lives on their own or managed their money on their own or were given that freedom. I grew up thinking I was going to be 80 years old eating cat food under a bridge. And that was true even though I had assets. Even though someone else would have said, you've got enough money to retire, I still was scared to death that I would somehow lose everything. So she's a guardian.
Thanks, Janine. We have a few more questions for you, and in a moment we're going to shift to our audience for any questions that they might have. We have a few that have been submitted in advance, and so any audience members, you are encouraged. If you've got a question, please write it into the chat. We'll be keeping an eye on those, and we'll relay those to Janine. Or if you would like to ask that question yourself, we'll call on you to do so. If you prefer that we ask it, just indicate that in the chat. Let me turn it back to Sara for a couple more questions, and then we'll go to audience questions.
Thanks, Matt. Janine, you mentioned a couple of your previous work experiences, especially working for one of those large philanthropists, large foundations that kind of operates a certain way. So you've worked for both for-profit, institutional nonprofits. How has your work in those organizations influenced your outlook on making a difference with your money? How do you want to do it differently than they do? What were you looking to sort of be able to do yourself that some of these large funders were doing?
Right. Well, as we talked about a little bit earlier, the decision to actually start really doing this with my money in a meaningful way happened as a result of my being in the work that I was and having the unique opportunity and privilege to be in some of those early conversations around impact investing and the new philanthropy. So that was really pivotal and important. The other thing I think I started to realize more because of the work that I was doing was the opportunity to invest in private deals. So what happens for a lot of us, particularly women, if we do learn about investing, we're usually told to save, and then we're told to invest in the stock market and in index funds. Maybe we're told about bonds, but that's about it. Right? We're not told about everything else. Maybe we know about real estate, but we're not told about all the other ways that we can invest. And private investing is actually, first of all, it's super fun. It's really awesome to be able to meet entrepreneurs and these exciting businesses that they're starting and just to learn about what's out there and to invest in them. But the other thing that I started to learn is that as women, we are completely left out of that picture as well. So for example, in the United States in 2019, of all the venture capital investment that was made in this country, only 2.8% was invested in female CEOs. I think that's right. It's either 2.6 or 2.8. I'm forgetting right at the moment, but it's about that level, female CEOs. And that went down to 2.3 in 2020. So women are not getting capital to run their businesses. And so, like a number of other women, I have now realized I have the opportunity to take my own money and invest in female CEOs through either private debt or private equity. And so I'm doing that. And it's been super fun. I love it. So I've joined with other women who pool their money together, and we co-invest in females who are leading socially responsible businesses. And that came from the work that I was doing and the awareness that that raised. And so there's actually a chapter in the book about private investing, what it is, how it works, and how you can find other women to do this with, because more women really need to step up to the table to invest in ourselves, to get the kinds of products and services that we need, because I don't think the men are going to do it, at least not as fast as we want them to.
Thanks, Janine. I think my overall kind of favorite part of the book was literally stepping away and thinking, what are the types of investing that I'm already doing that I sort of knew to do or was taught to do, and what have I not looked into yet? And I think that what you were just talking about with the opportunities in private investing and with the Jobs Act after 2008 has really increased the access for non-accredited investors to make those private investments. It's a really exciting opportunity. We were also really happy to see the chapter that you covered, making an impact with grants. So, continuing along, using your philanthropic dollars to make an impact. Just last month, we announced a new way for our stakeholders, our Oikocredit US stakeholders, to invest in impact using a so-called recoverable grant. Can you tell us what a recoverable grant is and how you see them being used?
Sure. So again, we traditionally think that philanthropy means we put our money and we give it to a nonprofit or charity and we never see it again. And for the most part, we never hear from that nonprofit or charity again, or we hear very little from them, right? But there are many really interesting ways that you can use grant dollars to support nonprofits and even for-profits that are doing things that are socially responsible. So in the case of a recoverable grant, what you're basically talking about is if you give your money to a charitable organization, particularly something called a donor advised fund, which we talk about in the book, or other types of organizations like that, they are holders of that grant capital until you are ready to give it out. One of the things that you could do is you could actually invest that money in an organization like Oikocredit, right? And they take that money, they lend it out, they do what they want to do with it. And at the end of some period, they're actually using it more like a loan or an investment as opposed to a grant. They use that money to achieve the social outcome that they want to achieve. And then that money comes back and it goes back into the DAC. Sometimes it's just the principal that goes back. Sometimes it's principal plus interest. Sometimes it's principal plus growth, whatever. It goes back into the DAC. Now, when you make that contribution to the DAC in the first place, you are giving the money away. So you cannot touch that principal. It can't come back to you, and none of the profit on that principal can come back to you. But you now have that corpus of money that you had quote unquote given away. It went out in the world. It did some great good. It came back. Now you can give it away again. And so you can continue to do that, where that money can be recycled through, and it doesn't have to be a one-time giveaway. So that's one option that you have in the philanthropic sphere.
Thanks, Janine, so much. I understand we have a question from one of our audience members. Amber, would you like to go ahead and read that question?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a question from Charlotte. What is the first step for most people? What should we suggest to others besides reading your book, Janine?
Well, one of the things that I think is really the first step, and particularly for women, is just find out what you own right now. What are you invested in right now? You would be surprised how many people can't answer that question. How are your assets allocated? So one of the things we talk about in the book is a very important decision for people is how their assets are allocated. And what that means is what percent of your total asset base do you have in cash? What percent of it do you have in bonds? What percent of it do you have in the stock market? What percent do you have in real estate or private deals, etc.? Across the board, how is your money allocated? Why is it allocated that way? Who made those decisions? Is that going to get you to the goals that you have in your life, whether that's putting money aside for your kids' education or putting money aside for your retirement fund? Are those decisions right? And then within those buckets, what are you actually invested in? So that's the very first step, is know what you've got just in general financially. I mean, when you think about the kind of investing that I'm talking about, it is not something that is 100% different than investing. It is investing plus, right? So all the decisions that you make around investing still exist when you invest your values. The difference is the investment vehicles that you choose after you've made some of those bigger decisions. So once you know what you're invested in, then the next thing to do is look at, well, what are they doing in the world? And we offer you tools and ways to investigate that for each asset class. And see what you're actually supporting with your money. And then once you know what you're supporting with your money, if those things don't align with what you want, you'd actually like to make a change, that's when you start doing the research to figure out what you would want to move those assets to. And again, we give you information in the book to help you do that. But the place to start is know what you own.
Thank you, Janine. We have another question that was sent in. Can you really avoid the big banks? Isn't it inconvenient to use small local financial institutions?
So I don't think so. I mean, you have to look into the financial institutions, but there are a number of financial institutions called CDFIs that do really great things at the local level. There are credit unions. Some of these institutions are huge. Like, for example, there's a values-aligned bank called Amalgamated Bank. They have $40 billion in assets under management. That's not a trivial bank. When I was writing the chapter on cash, I actually moved my money into 4 different banks because, again, I experiment. I wanted to see what it took. I've since consolidated that. But so I'm in a bank in Oakland called Beneficial State Bank. It's a very well-run bank. They have a lot of assets under management. I have all the technology I need, just like anybody else. I don't really use ATMs, but they have an ATM network of about 30,000 ATMs around the country. I never go to a bank branch anymore. I can do everything through the mail. So I don't think that you have to give up a lot going to a smaller bank. You need to check and do your research to make sure that a smaller bank has what you need in terms of technology, et cetera, but many of them do. And so I think there's a fallacy from the past. I think it was true in the past that smaller banks were not as efficient. I don't think that's true anymore. And you can actually, because of technology, you can bank at a bank that's doing great stuff on climate change, or a bank that's supporting social justice, or a bank that's supporting small farmers in Maine, or whatever it is that you care about, even though you're not in that place. And so we talk about all of this in the book, but there's also a great website called, it just flew out of my head. You'll have to read the book. The website just flew out of my head, the one that I wanted to point you to. I might remember it in this conversation. If I do, I will. So sorry about that.
Janine, I know the feeling. You mentioned
Mighty Deposits, that's what it's called. Mighty Deposits. Look up Mighty Deposits. You can put in where you are located, or you can put into the site your particular area of interest, and it will give you financial institutions that will meet that goal.
Wow, that's great to know. Janine, you mentioned in your answer CDFIs. Can you remind us what is a CDFI?
So a CDFI is a small financial institution. It's a community development financial institution is what the term actually stands for. And what it means is it is a financial institution that was specifically created to meet the needs of people who are not served by big banks. So these organizations tend to give loans to people in their communities. They tend to give loans to women who are starting their own businesses, who can't get loans from a bank. They give loans to underserved populations, minority populations, people of color, et cetera, who are trying to buy homes or buy a car, or get a student loan. So they're very focused on the local community. I bank at one of those too. As I said, I opened a lot of bank accounts, and I get really cool information from them about the work that they're doing in the community and who they're actually helping. And it warms my heart when I get one of those emails and learn about a family that this bank has kept in their home, or, you know, learn about a kid who's the first kid who has had an education in that family who was able to do it because of that bank. So that makes me feel really good about where those dollars are sitting.
Thanks, Janine. We have another question that was emailed in. What's your favorite values-aligned investment that you've made?
Oh my gosh, there are so many of them. So one that I really like in the public equities market is actually something called NIA Global Solutions. It's a fund, it's a stock fund that is a managed stock fund. It's an actively managed stock fund, which means that there is a person, in this case a woman, who makes the decisions about what companies are invested in that fund. And she has started this from the get-go with an eye to really focus on companies that are making a real positive difference in the world. So it's a fund that invests in about 50 companies, large to small, US and not. And she has traditionally done extremely well with that fund. Last year, it returned about 95% after net. It netted about 95%. So that was a phenomenal return. So I really just like her ethos, what she's doing. And I think I love supporting her because less than 2% of fund managers are women. And she's giving me amazing return. On another end of the spectrum, I made a private loan to a female entrepreneur who was putting in a bagel shop in my neighborhood. And I just really liked her vision, her energy, her smarts. When she showed me the financial plan, she had 3 financial models that this is what I think is going to happen. This is kind of my worst case scenario. Here's how I'm going to manage out of that. And wouldn't this be awesome if this could happen? And she had thought through all of that to such a degree that I figured if this woman could make it work, anyone could. Her shop was 1 year delayed because of building permits and stuff. She opened in November of 2019. 4.5 months later, we hit COVID. Everybody knows what happened to the food and restaurant business. She pivoted in such a way that she figured out how to not only make that business work, but thrive. And she paid all of her investors back a year in advance, all the interest that we were due, all of it. So that was a great investment for me too.
That's an awesome story. We have a couple more questions here. How has making values aligned investments changed your life?
Well, one thing that it did, so I mentioned earlier, I think I mentioned that 3 years ago, I retired from my international career. Here's another story. You know, what is retirement? Well, we all probably, if you say, oh, she's retired, he's retired, you probably have a vision of what they do. What I realized I retired from was an income. So the impact that, because I work as hard as I ever worked, so the impact that this has had on my life is it has caused me to write a book. It has caused me to start a nonprofit, a new one in my retirement years. I'm basically starting a new career for which I'm not going to be paid as a result of this stuff. But you know what? That's okay because I really love it, and I am passionate about this stuff. I'm passionate particularly about helping women think differently about their money and recognize their power and potential. I mean, only 9% of us think that we would be better investors than men. We are scared to death of our money. We put 70 cents on the dollar in cash. We hold it in cash. There's a wealth gap that we're all familiar with in terms of we don't make as much money as men, but we don't realize that there's a wealth gap because we don't invest. And so we're leaving so much money on the table, and we just have to get better at it. And we have to, I do not want to see another generation of young women came up that have not been taught about how to be smart, confident investors. And I want to see the term investing no longer be this thing that we do to maximize return without caring about what it's doing in the world. I want to see a world where that is the de facto way we invest. We invest with conscience. So how has it changed or had an impact on me? Yeah, it's defining the third part of my life, I guess.
Another question we have, what are the diligence questions you ask of a new fund manager to determine if their values align with yours?
So that then depends on the asset class you're talking about, right? So if I am looking at public equities, which many of us are invested in, I don't usually go to the fund manager and ask them that. I don't really have the time, and I'm just not doing that. I also realize that I'm not going to get the perfect solution right now. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to do better than I'm doing now and keep moving to better, but recognizing I'm not going to get perfect or best. So there are tools, and one of the tools I really love for the public equities market is something called As You Sow, Invest Your Values. It's a website, and you can actually put a fund ticker in there and find out how they value that fund and what is in it. And you can look at that fund across 7 different lenses. You can look at fossil free, gender diversity, prisons. Are you invested in the prison system? Are you invested in guns, weapons? There are 7 different lenses. And I can use that to both identify what's in things that I currently own, as well as use it as a research tool when I'm considering new ones. So for me, that's okay. In terms of diligence that I would do on a fund that I might be considering in the private equity space or the private debt space, that's a little bit different. I have financial advisors. I don't shun them. I actually use them now as my teachers. I don't listen to everything they tell me to do. I make my own decisions, but I definitely talk to them. I listen to them and inquire from them. And I have one financial advisor who's really good with private deal flow. And so they will find some of that stuff for me, and they diligence it. And when I do diligence on an individual company, again, it depends on whether I'm the only one involved in that deal or if I'm representing other people's money. If I'm representing other people's money, I obviously will do a much deeper diligence. But the things I really care about personally when I'm looking at a deal is, first of all, it has to have a social impact, full stop. Second, for me now, it has to be run by a woman, or there at least have to be women in very significant roles, full stop. And then I'm really curious about the product market fit. Do I really think this thing is going to have an audience? Do I really think it's going to be successful? More than 50% of startups fail because they fail to get the product market fit right. And a lot of people don't even look at that. So that's super important for me. The energy, the trust I have in the entrepreneur, the resilience I see in the entrepreneur, the passion that I see in the entrepreneur. And then I really care about their financials. I don't expect them to get it all right, because when you're in a startup, you're not. But I want to know how thoroughly they thought through their assumptions, and I want to know what their plan B is. So that's why I found the woman who did the bagel shop so compelling, because she had really thought that stuff through, and she knew how she was going to get herself out of a hole if things didn't really turn out as well as she thought they would. And that's important to me too.
Janine, we are almost out of time, but I got one more question for you. Your book came out in May, and rumor has it that sales are going well. Recent research shows that interest in values-aligned investment has been increasing exponentially over the past decade. What have you learned through the process of launching your book about how people, and women in particular, are increasingly interested in investing with their values?
So that's a great question. I mean, I'm constantly amazed by the growth of this sector. For example, we know that in 2019, one in every $4 that institutional investors were investing was going into this kind of values-aligned investment. Last year, it was 1 in 3. So the sector is growing incredibly quickly. And I learned a lot about other products that are in the market. So I did a lot of research around what's available for people that they could actually invest in. One of the things that was really challenging for me was finding investments. Even my financial advisors weren't pointing me to things. And so I had to do a lot of that research on my own. So even though I knew that putting actual investments into the book would make it less time enduring, if you will, I thought it was really important to do that. But the thing I learned more than anything else while I was writing this book, my original intention was just to write about democratizing values-aligned investing. And what I learned along the way were some of the things that I talked about earlier, which is how disengaged women are from their money. And so I realized that the book needed to talk to values-aligned investing, but it actually also really needed to give women some confidence around this and to just demystify the terms, because a lot of times I have had so many women say to me, you know, I'll call my financial advisor, who's this guy, and he'll tell me about what's going on in the greater economy and how this is having an impact on that. It's like all of that stuff just goes over my head. I don't know what he's talking about. I don't know what it means in terms of my money, and I certainly don't know what it means in terms of my goal, right? So just being able to understand the lingo and to be able to ask the right questions is so empowering. And so the book really pivoted as a result of what I was learning about women and where we are in terms of our own confidence around our money.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Janine. That wraps up our time for today's conversation. Thanks to all audience members who asked questions either today during this interview or in advance. And Janine, thank you so much for joining us in this first of a series of interviews that we're calling Alignment: Using Your Values to Invest in Social Change.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was really delightful to be here, and I applaud you in putting this new vehicle together to inform people about the possibilities that they have to invest in a different way and to change the story about our money.
And to our viewers, join us the same time in a month, Wednesday, July 28th, for our second interview in the Alignment series. We will be talking with the CEO of Upaya Social Ventures, Kate Cochran, and Kate's going to tell us about how Upaya builds scalable businesses, dignified jobs, and long-term prosperity in India. Among other things, Upaya has pioneered the recoverable grants we were just talking about as a way for people to have impact with their philanthropic dollars.
To learn more about Oikocredit US or how to support our impact in low-income countries, visit our website at oikocreditus.org. And until next time, on behalf of Sara and Amber and me and the whole team at Oikocredit US, thank you for your support. We'll see you soon.